Hi everyone, good morning and happy Monday. In today's episode, we are going to talk about career challenges faced by highly sensitive individuals. This episode is a part of our ongoing series exploring career challenges faced by highly sensitive people and how they can either find purposeful paths or develop strategies to handle challenges in their current work environment. And today we are specifically focused on highly sensitive people who are introverts. And once again, Thomas is here to delve into the challenges encountered by highly sensitive introverts and share tips on navigating them. If you're curious to learn more about Thomas, his website is linked in the description. Personally, I'm a big fan of his podcasts like You and I Make a Thing and The Creative Shoofly. In his latest episode that I tuned into, he discussed Scrum and role switching for those of us with diverse interests. I'm really sorry for my raspy voice. I'm under the weather with a cold. And also, if you recall, Thomas was a guest on one of our earlier podcast episodes where he shared insights on navigating creative blocks and discussed various tools to boost creativity, one of my favorite episodes. You can find the link to that episode in the description as well. Without further ado, let's dive right in.
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about like you said that you had this experience of growing up as a child of immigrant parents in San
hmm
Francisco,
Yeah.
and I know it's a state thing, but even when I moved from one state to another in my own country, I also felt
hmm
like there was cultural difference. I felt like maybe I couldn't fit even at like workplace. I felt like an
Yeah.
outsider.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you like how it shaped your sense of belonging and identity, and how it impacted your career decisions or your career choices, being, the child of an immigrant parent.
Right. Right. Well, so what I have to say is, so my parents immigrated from Germany here to San Francisco, and I was 7 months old or something like that. So I was born in Germany, and they came over here basically to start a new life. You know, this is now back in 1961,
Mhm.
and they were looking for opportunity because in those days there was very little opportunity in Germany at the time. Um, and so my parents, I grew up in a very loving family, but
Mhm.
my parents were, because they were immigrants, they were also a little bit insular. And what I mean by that is they didn't really, um, try to assimilate American culture or sports or anything like that. And so I grew up in a very loving family, but still sort of um, isolated and I when I would grow up, so first of all, I was very, very shy growing up as a kid, and going to school. I never felt like I fit in with anyone because just I didn't find anyone that had that sort of similar background. Um, because my parents didn't follow sports, I knew nothing about American sports. I
Mhm.
mean, my dad liked soccer a little bit, but there, back in those days in the 1960s, there was very little soccer on TV, here in the States. So, um, I grew up feeling secure, but also um, definitely not fitting in. Now, that changed a little bit when I went to high school. And so I ended up going to an academic high school, a public academic high school here in San Francisco, and and it had a very large student body. I mean, there were 2,400 kids going to this high school
Mhm.
in three grades because it started in sophomore it started in sophomore year in the 10th grade. Um, and what that meant is that because it was academic, so first of all, being academic school, everybody was just a little bit more nerdy, little bit more focused on academics and not on culture and sports and things like that. So that felt comfortable. And the other thing is that because there were so many students, it meant that I could just be anonymous, right? I could just do my stuff and not feel like I had to really interact very much. And I did make some friends there. We were all, I mean, one of the clubs that I joined there was a computer club. Now this was in 1976, so this was like before personal computers. This was during the age when computers were these, things that were in sizable, they were like the size of refrigerators in big rooms, in big air conditioned rooms. So, but that's where I first learned to do some computer programming.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew at that time that I really wanted to be more of a generalist than a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do coming out. I got my degree in electrical engineering and not computer science. So I knew that I was going to be working down in Silicon Valley, which I eventually ended up there. And so by the time I got out of college, I was not so worried about not fitting in. Like I was comfortable with not fitting in. I guess that's the best way to put it. I was
Yeah.
comfortable in just who I was at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so talk about the work interactions. Like, was it a bit different when you started working? Did you feel like
Well,
an outsider, or were you like,
no, I didn't feel like an outsider really because my first job was as a test engineer. So it was on a chip manufacturing line, and I was, my job was to program the machines that would test the chips.
okay,
And that was a fairly well understood job, so I could pick it up pretty quickly. But it was also one of those jobs that was a very generalist job. Like there wasn't like you don't go to school to get a degree in test engineering,
yeah,
right? This is something that you really do learn on the job, and every chip is different, every test device is different. And so I was always sort of figuring out how to make these things work, and that was like that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a generalist. I wanted to do something new every time. So that was good. Um, there were some frustrations, like you could be working on a project for 9 months or 12 months or even longer, 15 months, and then the company decides that, oh, we're actually not going to sell that chip because there's no market for it or something like that. So there
right,
was a little bit of frustration in that sense, that it's like, oh, here I poured my um, all this time into this project, and it was an interesting project, and then it doesn't go anywhere. But eventually you learn to, like, that's just the nature of the way things work in Silicon Valley sometimes, at least in those days, in the 1980s.
right. And I think I can relate to, like, when I was like deciding like what I want to do in life. I
Hmm.
felt like pulled towards a lot of things. I want to do this also, that also. So I think I can relate. And speaking of frustrations, I wanted to
Hmm.
ask you like your experience with your boss, right?
Hmm.
Because I think mostly like introverts, and if they are highly sensitive also, they
Yeah.
face those challenges. If you're, specifically like if your work environment is like full of extroverted people. So
Yeah.
talk about that specific scenario where I think you had a clash with your boss because of some things.
Yeah, I did. So one of my bosses, so I had several bosses, obviously in the work that I did there, and for the most part, because my job was go create this test for this chip, I could pretty much be left alone, right? And I like that, especially as an introvert. I like that. It's like, yeah, there were extroverted engineers. They tend to be in the marketing department or in sales or whatever like that, and we would just say, go away, I'm busy, whatever. Um, but I did have this one boss who was very anxious and was like he was high strung, he was a busybody, and he was always like, you know, uh, getting into things. And in his mind, every little thing was a crisis, right? So he would react to things as if things were crisis, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there was one point where I got so overwhelmed and so wound up that I just wanted to like punch my fist through the glass.
Yeah.
We had these offices with doors, but the side of the on the side of the door was sort of this glass where you could see into the office, right?
Mhm.
And at one point I was just like so tempted, although I didn't want to hurt myself, anyway. And I realized at that point that like, I have to do something, I have to communicate. And that's really was the key for me, was like to what I've learned over the years is when there's something that's frustrating me, it's time for me to start communicating and start to ask questions. I mean, that was the real learning there. It's like don't let it, don't
Build
turn
up.
it inward.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't let it build up. Turn it outward and get it out there so that you can resolve it.
Right.
Um, and and I did. Eventually, what's sort of a funny story relating to that boss is that he invited me. He was really a sweet man, or he really was. He was just a very anxious person, but he was a sweetheart of a man, and he invited me and my wife to go to one of his family functions, and he has this big family down in Santa Cruz, and so we went there. It was kind of nice to be invited by the boss to his place, and his whole family there. And what I noticed was that his whole family was just ignoring him all the time. I mean, he would be doing this and saying that and whatever, and his family was just like, oh yeah, whatever.
Mhm. Right.
So um, so I learned a little bit from that too, is like uh, not to take not to absorb his anxiety, not to absorb his energy, right?
Right.
He had this sort of certain energy, sort of an anxious energy, and what I learned from that is that people who knew him well just did not absorb it. They just said, okay, whatever, and so I learned from that, and I was able to um, deal with him much better after that.
But did you end up talking to him also about
I
it?
Oh, I did. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, eventually, because it's just, yeah, you can't keep that stuff in.
Right. And
Um,
it could be that he was a highly sensitive person. Maybe he didn't know, how to manage emotions,
that's
because
true.
I've seen, like, people think that if you are a highly sensitive individual, it's like all, lovey-dovey and all that. But I've seen, like, if you are not self-aware and if you don't know how to manage those emotions, uh, you can be, a bit toxic also, even
Right.
if you are a
Right.
highly sensitive individual. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also the sort of the high sensation seeking aspect for
Yeah.
some people who are sensitive.
Right.
So that could be it as well. Although, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to him. You could definitely make a case that he was highly sensitive, and he was just um, he had just was absorbing all that energy without realizing what he was
Mhm.
doing to himself.
Right. And
Yeah.
you had also mentioned that at that time you wished you had a therapist or a coach to speak with. So did you afterwards maybe decide to have a coach, or did you have a coach? Because
I
I
didn't
think
learn about
it is
I
important.
didn't learn about coaching until I actually left Silicon Valley. So I worked in Silicon Valley for about 18 years. And then in the late 1990s, I hired on as a consultant.
Mhm.
And this was during the dot-com boom era, with the first dot-com boom, which was the late 1990s. And I was hired out to a company here in San Francisco, one of the dot-coms that was here in San Francisco. And it was about that time that I started to learn about coaching. Um, and what happened is that I worked for a couple of years as that consultant, and then the dot-com crash happened. This was about 2001, and then I was out of work for a while, and I had the opportunity to be an IT director at a small company. It was actually a coach training company. Um, and that was a great opportunity because unlike my previous jobs where I was just an engineer in a larger company, here I was sort of responsible for all of technology in this smaller company. And like I said before, I like to have jobs where I'm doing all kinds of different things. So so I took that job, and of course, as a part of it, not only did I meet lots of coaches, but I was able to take some of that coaching program because as an employee, they allow you to take the courses for free. So so that's when I started having a coach, and also learning about just the skill of deep listening to listen to someone, which is such a gift, really, to be able to listen to someone. So yeah, I'm glad that I was able to do that. I stayed with the company for a couple of years, and then I became self-employed, and they've been actually a client of mine ever since, and they're still a client to this day.
Right. And I think people usually underestimate having a therapist or a coach, but yes, I think it's very important for your well-being. And speaking of self-employment also,
Mm-hmm.
since you are a highly sensitive individual and an introvert, I believe, what
Mm-hmm.
were the biggest challenges you faced in, self-employment?
Oh yeah. The first challenge, or one of the bigger challenges, is when you're self-employed, uh, you have to learn how to turn off the you have to learn how to turn off work at the end of the day. So that was sort of the first big learning, is like, how do I go to bed and actually get to sleep without having to worry, like, okay, where am I going to, what do I need to do here, and where am I going to make, some money, and all of that. It's very, very important to be able to um, leave work, especially because I work from home, and as being self-employed, most of my work is working from home. In the first years, I did go and visit clients, but in the 2010s, we had I forget the name of the product. TeamViewer is what it was called at the time. This was before Zoom, right? We had TeamViewer, and now with Zoom, it was just easier to be able to connect with people remotely and help them that way. So yeah, so that's one of the aspects, is just to be able to leave work, even though it's you're still in your home, you still look at your work computer and all of that. And I'm very lucky in the sense that my clients find me. So I've never really had to do any advertising.
Mhm.
I do, when I have good clients, I will always tell them, hey, if you know anybody else that would be interested in what I do, and here's what I'm interested in, right? As an example, I like to build APIs, and I like to connect systems together, in terms of software. So I tell that to my clients and say, hey, if you happen to be talking to someone, let them know. And so I've been lucky in that way, that people have found me by word of mouth. So yeah, I still, to this day, I don't like cold calling,
Yeah.
right? It's still something that I really don't like to do. I do it when I need to.
Mhm.
Um,
But
but
how about like your client relationships? Because as an introvert, I like initially I used to be overwhelmed. Like,
yeah.
like you also mentioned, if you have to, respond to every other request. So how do you deal with that? And how do you maintain that, because to have a long-term client base, you also sort of need to be a bit maybe
Yeah.
extroverted sometimes.
Yeah, gets back down to communication, and what really has helped in recent years is one of my clients showed me, or they use the agile methodology for software development. And in agile, one of the important aspects of agile is that you check in frequently. So I started this with my other clients as well, and basically I told them, look, I don't want to work on a project and then 3 weeks later I'll talk to you and then realize that I was doing the wrong thing, or I went in the wrong direction. And that did happen in earlier when I was self-employed. Someone would say, well, we need this and that, and they were kind of vague, and then I would go off and do it, and wouldn't talk to them for a stretch of time, and then we'd reconnect, and then I'd find out, like, oh, this isn't what they wanted at all, or and then of course, how do you bill, all that kind of stuff, right? And that cost estimation in software development is extremely hard.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to do in software. So and I'm open about that. I tell people, it's like, okay, I have an idea that it might take this long, but you know, I don't use retainers. I don't do any work on speculation. I bill by the hour, for my
Yeah.
work. And so I am very, very straightforward about, I'm going to start working, for several hours on this, and I expect to bill that and be paid for it. So like I was saying, more recently, that was within the last, 5, 6 years or so, I've sort of insisted that with my clients that we speak at least once a week, if not twice a week.
Mhm.
And so if I look at my calendar now, I just have regular, calls for my clients where it's just, okay, let's see what's going on, and this is what I found here, and it's very nice because in a couple days things change, especially in the software industry, things change. So you
Right.
want to be in communication a lot. Uh, and as an introvert, I really enjoy one-on-one conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's not that I don't want to be with people or not talk to people. Um, I find that what drains me is like large groups.
Yeah. Same.
But but when I get to talk one-on-one with someone, oh yeah, I light up, and I'm happy with that.
Right.
So just communicate often is
Right.
the best thing I can say.
Yeah. But do you also use any strategies or any like anything when you have to select your clients, being a highly sensitive individual and an introvert?
I think that being highly sensitive is a plus because you can sort of feel people's energies pretty quickly when you're talking
Right.
to them. And what I look for is, like, are they curious? Are they curious about me?
Hmm.
Um, are they fun? And I mean, it's kind of weird to say that in a business setting, but there's actually something to that, I think. But I listen to what their goal is, and my favorite clients are the ones that have these ideas, like, I have this vague idea and I want to do this and I don't know quite how to do that, and so we're almost like trying to solve the whatever it is together,
Right.
and then it's fun. So that's the type of client that I really look for. I shy away from clients who are like, hey, I just want to make a buck here and I need you to make this system, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, no, okay, I'll pass on that.
Mhm. Right.
um, so yeah, I think there is something to having a certain empathy um, that you can use when you're listening to a client, and trying to figure out, what kind of client they are.
What advice will you have for highly sensitive individuals who maybe, are facing difficulties in their workplace environment? And yes.
As I said before, communicate. I would say to anybody who's highly sensitive, like we are, the first real step is to just start communicating, and communication is also listening, right? So it may be asking questions, and asking questions actually is, again, it's a form of listening, and listening is a gift, is a real gift that you can give to someone. But also, if you feel overwhelmed, or if you feel frustrated, or if you feel afraid, right? Because you can certainly feel afraid where, you'll come across an issue or a problem that's like, I don't know how to solve this one, right?
Right.
Yeah, definitely speak up. I mean, what my experience with clients has been is like, the clients usually come back and say, oh, well, okay, I hadn't considered that, or, oh, that actually is not all that important. Let's move on to this other thing, right?
Right.
So instead of keeping it in, it's better to just, get it out there and figure out, like, where the client is in terms of what their thinking is.
Right. Yeah.
The more that you can get in sync with their thinking, then I think the less you'll feel overwhelmed, and the less you'll feel, frustration or anything like that.